So thank you, everybody. Thank you
funny.
for coming along today to this panel discussion, Contemporary Scottish Playwriting and Religion, which has been put on as part of the New College Festival here, which is coming sadly to a close. This is the penultimate event, and I think probably there should be a very cheeky move on my part to get some applause going right from the beginning. But I think we should have a round of applause for Alison Jack and Gillian Mitchell for what they've done here over the past few days.
Yeah.
And I'm going to invite you, after I've introduced our wonderful panel members, to give us some applause again. But let me get through those introductions first. So to begin with, can I introduce myself? My name is Michael John O'Neill. I'm a playwright and a producer based here in Scotland. And joining me on this panel today is the wonderful Jo Clifford. And Jo is a playwright, a performer, proud father and grandmother, and very recently, I think, a saint. Yep. Very recently. Made a saint very locally here in Edinburgh. The author of over 110 plays. Her work, The Gospel According to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, has been translated into 7 languages and seen in every continent in the world. And did I overhear that it was just in Norway?
I've just back from Norway. I've seen it there.
So it really has been everywhere. Moving on to this looming presence here. This is David Gregg. Who is the artistic director of the Royal Lyceum here in Edinburgh, but is also a renowned playwright and director in his own right. The titles we have here are only a fraction, but I've got The Pyrenees, The Ballad of Layla and Lee, Damascus, The Strange Undoing of Prudentia Hart, and I want you to keep that title in your mind because we're going to come back to it later on in the talk. The Letter of Last Resort and the events. And his work, like Joe, has been staged all over the world and in many languages. So, and finally, we come to Domini Jethwa, who is a writer and filmmaker trained in screenwriting at the National Film School, and is thus very capable of instructing how to attach microphones to heads, as you all witnessed.
That's what I learned at the film school.
Yeah, that's what you learned. Your work has been produced by the National Theatre of Scotland and Dundee Rep, the marvellous Last Queen of Scotland, which I believe was very informed by your own experience. And more recently, Hindu Times, which has got a new title, which I'm going to let you say because I'm going to absolutely butcher it.
Deities Day Dundee.
Deities Day Dundee. Is that close?
Yes. I'm looking at David because I'm like, yeah, I want that title.
Which was performed as an audio play during the Lyceum's own soundstage series of productions, but hopefully we'll be able to see it in the flesh at some point in the near future. Now, I'd like, first of all, to encourage you again to give a round of applause to our panel members before we begin to encourage. And then I'd like to move swiftly on and say goodbye to my daughter, who's exiting. Bye-bye. These are all the cheap tricks I'm using here.
Oh my God, she's gotten more attention than anybody.
What I'd like to do first is I'd like to pilfer a question which came from the audience yesterday at yesterday's poetry panel and modify it slightly for a theatrical context. And this is the question I've warned you all about, so you've had time to let it gesticulate, because it's a tough one right out of the gate. I'm not a very friendly, encouraging chair for a panel. The question I'd like to ask is really rooted in what we're talking about today, which is theatre, which is live performance. And sometimes, especially in the context of a literary festival, we forget that theatre is a live phenomenon. It's a live medium and something that we experience communally most often. So I'd like to begin by asking this modified question that came out of the audience yesterday. Is there, and I'll go first to you, is there a single experience of live performance that you can remember that you feel? And when I say live performance, it doesn't need to necessarily be theatre. I'm just thinking about the gamut of live work that you can experience, whether that be music or kind of theatre or something that happens with an audience involved. Is there something of live performance that you felt spiritually changed by, or perhaps an experience that took you by surprise or exhilarated you or moved you to a degree that you weren't prepared for going in?
Yeah, when I went to India, I think that was 2000, and I went to this village where It was my uncle's family that actually lived there, and it was really remote, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and there was no like bathrooms or toilets or nothing like that, and you had to walk across this big massive field just to like get a wee bit of water. And but we had this subta, and the subta was this kind of bringing together of lots of the village people, and then people from London and families would give money to support and feed the kids and everything. And they had priests there who were reciting scripture that was in Sanskrit. And I remember it was under this enormous, just like this tent thing, and it was baking heat, and you just sat there for like 8 hours a day listening to them. And it was just like, yeah, I mean, that totally changed me. And I remember sitting, listening, and I said to these women, because obviously I didn't understand the Sanskrit, and I said to them, like, I wondered if they knew what the priests were saying. And I was like, well, you don't call them priests in Indian, but like, you know, the religious men. And I said to some of the people sitting there, what are they actually saying? Do you know what he's saying? And the women were like, that to me, not. And I just thought that was quite funny as well, because it wasn't a sense of having to understand the exact sense of what they were speaking about, but with the Sanskrit, it actually changes your physiology and your biology, and you actually feel transformed by just hearing it. And in that sense, it's kind of like music. You don't have to have an understanding of what they're saying. They're not trying to put a message into you. It's the rhythms, obviously, that comes through the resonance of Om, and a lot of the Indian words have a resonance that can change the human brain neurology.
Yeah.
So when I left the place, quite honestly, I had a complete and utter shift in my mind about the way I'd grown up. Leaving Uganda, Africa, I'd been in torment about that history my whole life. And then I remember just walking away from that village and getting a sense that, well, even these troubling things, it's all part of something, and you know, it's okay. I guess there was a peacefulness that it brought.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it does. It has a physical impact on you, that kind of experience together.
And then I wanted to hold on to that feeling. I was like, I hope I hold on to this insight, this sense. I hope I can hold on to that. But you know what? After a while, when you leave and you go back to your life, you just start going back to that same circuitry of thinking, which is a shame. But speaking about it here today now, I'm remembering, and it's bringing that sense back, that, you know, that peacefulness back.
Thank you. I'll move on to David next. You're next in the line. I'm just gesturing. Wildly, David, I've been told I don't need to look back because there's a screen in front of me I can look at. But David, is there an experience that you can share?
Yes. Just quickly, I would say, I think I only have what you might call spiritual experiences during live events. I think that live theatre is in itself, is genuinely, relates to the spiritual to me anyway. It's a playing out in a sort of semi-shamanic way of possibilities. So yes, I always, I don't think I have spiritual experiences almost in any other context. However, the most recent, and I just feel a terrible cliche for saying it, but it really is true, was that on Monday night, just past, I went to see Bob Dylan's latest concert at the Armadillo in Glasgow. He's been touring an album that he released aged 80 during the lockdown called Rough and Rowdy Ways. And the album, when it came out, I liked it. I thought this was definitely really interesting, and it seemed very much in his wheelhouse. But I didn't kind of rave about it. But then I went to this concert that he'd staged, and the way it was so profound and so extraordinary, and it completely opened up the music to me in a way that I suddenly understood what he was doing that I hadn't seen in just the record. And it felt to me really profound. It was like this was an old man who knows that he is having this incredible last fire of creativity, and he is eager to put it across to you so you can understand what he's trying to say. And one of the elements of it that wasn't on the album but was live was he stood behind a piano. You couldn't see his face, very Bob Dylan trick, very funny, that, you know, you've gone all this way to see Bob Dylan, there's a great piano in front of him, you just see the top of his head. But he would sing with a microphone on the top of the piano, and he played with one hand, an upright honky-tonk piano, and he would play these notes whilst the band were absolutely tight and playing their blues very brilliantly and tight. He did this thing that was like an 8-year-old girl walking past the piano in the hall and just kind of clinking and plonking along to the music. And yet, so there was something like, I've gone all this way through my life. I'm the most lauded Nobel laureate poet that could be mystic and everything. And in the end, what it comes down to is this almost childlike simplicity and peace of plinking and plonking along. It was unbearably moving, I thought. So that was my. I'm sorry it had to be Bob Dylan. I feel like such a cliche for saying it.
No. It's very appreciated. We're doing the gamut here. I should say as well, you may have noticed that there's a little bit of lag in the connection that we've got with David. So occasionally, please forgive us. We might have a bit of overlapping, but we're well on top of it. Joe, finally, I know you felt particularly challenged by this whenever I flagged it to you before, but have you managed to settle on something that you feel comfortable talking about?
This is something that happened in 1985 in the rehearsals of the first original play I ever got staged. It was a play called Losing Venice, and it was on in the Traverse. And nobody had ever seen or had to rehearse a play like that before, and nobody quite knew how to do it. I didn't know what I was doing in rehearsal either. And just the week before the play was due to open, it was a Saturday, I remember, the director burst into tears in the rehearsal room in front of everybody and said, "I can't direct this play." And so, obviously, it looked like the play wasn't going to happen, and it looked like I'd destroyed this director who I loved and admired greatly because my work was so terrible. And I had been, at that time, I'd been struggling for 20 years to find my voice as a writer. And there was this play going to happen in the Traverse and open in the festival, and I had screwed it up. And I remember walking, it was the old Traverse in the Grass Market. I walked up the hill, and I was going to catch a bus home to Roslin, and buses were thundering past, and I literally wanted to throw myself under a bus. I felt that terrible about it, but I didn't, and I got home, and we lived in a cottage at the edge of the woods in Roslin, which had a courtyard, and I kind of arrived in a terrible state, and I couldn't talk to anybody about what had happened. And I went to the pram where my baby daughter, Katie, was. She was, I don't know, she must have been about 3 weeks old or something like that. And there she was, and she was awake, and she was looking up at me, and I picked her up, and I held her in my hand, and you know that, well, you'll know that, that a newborn baby has this calm, this wisdom. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and I walked round and round the courtyard, just looking at her. And we looked at each other. And it was like she said, "It's going to be all right." And that play was a huge hit, and it was all right.
It's beautiful. Thank you. So thank you all very much for throwing us responses to that. I think it was a really, really beautiful range of response to that prompt. I think to start off with, actually maybe following on a little bit from you, Joe, recently I was looking back at the 10th anniversary edition of Joe's The Gospel According to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, which was a work which debuted in 2009 at the Tron Theatre, and then had its anniversary performance there again in 2019. And what came along with that was a lovely edition of a published edition of the work that included a lot of context in how it came to be, and it included responses from all sorts of different people who've been involved in its journey over 10 years. It's a very profound piece of work, solo performed by Joe, often in non-theatrical spaces these days. Kind of it moves in and out. It can be performed in a theater, or it can be performed, I suppose, I don't know. Have you ever done it in anybody's living room? But you could.
I did it in a hotel bedroom once.
There we go. Okay, so that's the range of that show. But there's some really interesting in your foreword and your introduction. You're talking to begin with about your earliest kind of school days and how religion appeared in that context, and it got me thinking really about how was religion present in all of our lives at the earliest point. Was it in the home for us all? Was it in our communities? If it wasn't, was there an attitude towards it that was present, that you remember, that you have an early memory of? Joe, maybe I could begin with you again, because you've written about it so beautifully, and maybe that isn't even the beginning of where religion entered your consciousness. But where was that earliest point, and do you feel like those experiences, those earliest experiences, inform your writing and the work that you've made today?
Well, I was sent away to school when I was 8 years old, to boarding school, and one of the features of school life was that we had to go to chapel twice a day, morning and evening, and during chapel a bit of the Bible will be read, and I was in these places for 9 years, having bits of the Bible read at me for morning and evening every day.
Do you feel like you had context for it at that point, or was it just these fragments?
Well, I couldn't make any sense of them, obviously. I mean, of course you couldn't. Didn't make any sense at all. But somehow I grew up with a sense that that Jesus was a good person, that we had to try to be like Jesus if we could, and we would fail, but Jesus was with us because he said, I am with you always, I'm always with you. And he also said, when 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, here I am in the midst of them. And that's actually going to be the basis of my latest version of Queen Jesus, because I think that's important. And I don't know, I'm being a bit incoherent here because it's very, very difficult to talk about. I absolutely hated religion from about the age of 16 onwards. It was hypocritical shite as far as I was concerned. And it was because I think I went back to religion because I wanted to understand why people hated us, trans people, so much. And why did I hate myself so much? And I had a feeling it was something to do with the Bible. So I wrote a play about the Old Testament God called God's New Frock, which I performed. That was the first play I performed, really. It was in 1991, something like that. And I had a breakdown and forgot about it and all sorts of things. And then I went to Italy and I saw it translated into Italian. And God, they loved it in Italy. One of the lines was, God is a middle-aged man with a wardrobe full of frocks. A wardrobe he is frightened to open. And that line got a round of applause. I've never had that happen with any line I'd ever written. I was so excited that I said, well, look, I'll write you a sequel. Where was this coming to? And the sequel was Jesus, Queen of Heaven, in the New Testament. And I understood, then I had to read the Gospels all over again. That's what I was going to say. Whenever I write a play with a character, I'm sure David does the same, I'm sure everybody does the same, I become that person. I try to imagine what it's like to be them. I try to feel what they're feeling. I try to think what they're thinking. And then I write down what they tell me. And I read the Gospels over and over again. It was like adapting a novel. That's what you do. You learn it off by heart, more or less. And that was amazing. And then I understood something about Jesus. Then I thought, wow, okay, there is something going on here. And there's a bit where Jesus says, we've got to do two things. We've got to learn to love God with all our heart, with all our mind, and all our strength. I couldn't understand that because I didn't believe in God at the time. But the other thing he said was we must try to love our neighbour as ourselves. And then it occurred to me that what that was saying was we've got to learn to love ourselves. And I hated myself for being trans. And that was incredibly liberating because writing the play taught me how, and performing the play all these years, I mean, I still perform it now, has taught me how to love myself. Mm. Does that answer your question?
It does, beautifully. Thank you. Good. And I suppose the same to you, Jenny.
What's
the question? I know it's.
Yes.
It's
growing
the question
up.
is where was it at its earliest point for you? Was it there in the home? Was there religion in the home? Was there an attitude towards it or a sense of that you had that you feel, and anything from that you feel you've carried on into the work?
Well, we had an unusual situation because we left Africa under a military coup. So we came to Scotland and as refugees. And so being a refugee at that time, and being a child growing up, there was a really distinct thing about belonging and fitting in and not saying anything that was unusual and not talking about cultural things outside of the house. And, it was always be like everybody else. So there wasn't any discussion about where we came from, what had happened. I didn't even know what had happened growing up. And I knew that we weren't meant to talk about things and not talk about our religion and not talk about why we were different. Both my mum and dad weren't really very strict. I mean, they practice Hinduism, but they weren't strict because my mum did talk a lot about she'd felt kind of oppressed in the Indian culture because she'd had an arranged marriage when she was 15 and she never knew my dad, and all her sisters had had the same. So she'd felt that coming to Scotland was an opportunity of change for her. So she wasn't wanting to cling on to the cultural things of the Indian culture. But she'd always said to me there's so many aspects of Hinduism and the culture that she reveres and admires, but there's so many things that she doesn't. So she would speak about the things that brought her like positivity and warmth, and we had a picture of Bhagwan in our house, and I always remembered it was there, and he looked quite very, very serious, and he always looked disappointed at whatever angle you looked at him at. And it was always like, fuck's sake, it's like he knows what you've been doing. And I remember that picture was always there, but then I never asked my mum and dad who he was, because we grew up in an environment not to ask those types of questions. Mm-hmm. And so I just always remembered seeing him there, and that did affect me looking at him all the time, because when I went to India, I actually went to his mandir, and my auntie took me there, but she didn't know that was the picture that was in our house in Gotterstone. And the very first place I went to in India was his mandir. And she just took us down this wee lane, and I remember the lane, and there was loads and loads of people, and like everybody was totally like folk on crutches, people couldn't walk, and it was like totally mental, just like seeing that for the first time. And I was walking through this narrow lane, and I turned, and I felt like someone stare at us, and I turned and looked to the left, and along this alley it was just a dark little alcove, and these 5 men all dressed in white, and they were squatting. Every single one of them looked at me when I walked past for a long time. And it was like they saw something in me. It was mental, and I just always remembered that. And then I walked up to the mandir, and I seen him, Bhagwan, and the synergy of like seeing him in a council house in Whitfield, and then being in Porbandar, looking like at him and at his home. Yeah, that was, I mean, that's the feelings I've always had. It's been fragments of images and really strong notions, but never any explanation. And as an adult, I've went and read things and tried to find things out myself. But I've always been surrounded by things, and it's been a lot of imagery.
I definitely sense that from Last Queen of Scotland and Indie Times. You know, you get the central characters in that. They both evoke a feeling of being of being surrounded, but also being unable to access this world, this greater spiritual world.
Yeah, exactly. Because I got brought up just, you know, with Dundee culture, and so I didn't really understand this, you know, the Bhagavad Gita, and when I went to London and I would visit my gran, and she had like a mini mandir in her room, and every morning she would get up and read the Bhagavad Gita, and she would light the cotton candle, and she would go through her ceremony, and I would listen to her, and obviously she'd done it all in Gujarati, and I loved watching her do all of that, and I would pick up her Gita, and it was completely, I mean, she'd opened it so many millions and millions of times, all the pages, and it was a proper Indian one, so each page was like made out of that tissue type paper. And she'd read it so many times, and like, I mean, you look at my Bhagavad Gita, it's like, mine's isn't like that, but I've read it. And things like that, those impressions really struck with me because it's so important to have a tradition and a ceremony, and that's something that's so valuable to human beings. And sometimes, not like what my mum always used to say, the things that she had to endure because of religion, you know, that's not a good way to treat people, to treat women, and the inequality. But then there's all of this beauty, and, you know, just like she said, there's two sides to it, and you can't discount all of it. So she's always said she finds that beauty in it for her, but still she had to live through the actions, the decisions of, which was very normal in the village that they grew up. All of them had to get married when they were still young because of land, because of money, because of, that's the way it was, and they never even met the people. And I feel sometimes through the ancestry of my aunties, when they're telling those stories, you know, it does pass down through the generations, even if you don't know about it. It affects
The kind of
the identity of being a woman, I would say, yeah, for sure, what they've gone through.
That personal
in the
experience.
name of religion, people use that.
A thing that was very important to your mother, but was kind of corrupted and embattled by bigger forces, by the wants of a patriarchy, by the wants of the state, by the wants of land ownership and asset ownership, kind of getting in the way of something that is at its fundamental core a personal experience.
Exactly, yeah, and that's why I think, especially with Hindu Times, I'm looking at the things in Hinduism that inspire me, and always looking to see where the inspiration and the beauty is, because often we can never understand, but maybe it's the human mind that's corrupted these things and not the actual text, which can bring so much light.
Well, I'll pull you back to Hindu Times in just a moment, but before that, I just wanted to, David, I'm doing it all again, I'm keep on turning around, because you're just so huge. You'd already signaled that, you know, the profound spiritual experiences that have really marked you is exclusively in this kind of live performative world. But I suppose it's still interesting, you know, do you have any memory of religion in your childhood, or being in your community or home or anywhere near you?
Well, I have two distinct things. So in my family were not religious types. In the 60s, 70s from Aberdeenshire. But in particular, my mother was carved from the dark granite of Calvinism. Fishing villages along the northeast coast were formed by, and that her grandmother and mother and aunties and everybody around her would have been shaped by. And there, a bit like Jamie, there's no way you can avoid that. That just seeps into your bones. And I was, so therefore I was aware of a kind of very judgmental, very, very judgmental kind of, almost like Old Testament, if not God. I don't think it was a God. It was, if anything, it took the form of a kind of matriarch, you know, dressed in black, making sure that you never strayed, you know, from whatever the path would be. Don't get above yourself. That would be the worst thing you could possibly do. Don't be playful. What a terrible thing that would be. You know, just awful, awful. I mean, in fact, to be honest, you know, it still angers me now, and I see it in Scottish culture. And in fact, I think my interior critical monologue takes the form of John Knox sort of following me around, berating me, you know, generally for showing off or, you know, being whatever form of vulnerability one shouldn't do. So no, that was one side which I would say was almost entirely negative. There was another side which was the school I went to in Africa. Like Jamie, strangely enough, I was brought up in Africa, but under obviously different contexts in Nigeria. And my school was an American missionary school. And so we had Bible study constantly. And I, as a young child, I could tell you the names of the books of the Bible, forwards, backwards. I knew what Leviticus was and so on. They were very kind, loving people, these American evangelists, you know, quite liberal actually for back in the day, sort of 70s evangelists, very borderline hippies, I would say, but lovely, warm people, very kind people who gave me a lovely sense of almost like Joe's Jesus, a very warm, kind person. What I took away from it all, I think, is I still feel unable to have, if you like, a personal relationship with religion. I'm obsessed and interested with transcendence, but the way I always phrase it is, most people say I've got no time for organized religion, but I myself am a spiritual person. I have a personal relationship with whatever, Jesus or God. Whereas I'm the other way around. I really am interested in religion because I'm interested in people. I really like what people do. I find it fascinating. And so when people create things like poetry or rituals or belief systems or windows or whatever it might be that they create out of this sense, the culture of it, I find utterly fascinating. And I could, you know, imbibe it forever. And I imbibe any of it and all of it. I find it completely fascinating and interesting. But I've never been able to really cross through into having my own personal relationship, except with one God, and that would be Dionysus. Dionysus, the Greek god of theatre, of trance, of dance, of wine, although I'm now had to stop that, but anyway, Dionysus, who's probably non-binary, if he, she was anything, actually quite related to Jesus, I think, in sort of many of the sort of traditions, they seem to have similar roots. And I just, yes, I suppose for me, whenever I'm writing or doing any sort of work to do with theatre, I always feel you have to have a higher authority than your own, or than critics, or money, or any of the things that otherwise would be your authority. And I always feel like, you know, you offer this stuff to Dionysus, and is it worthy? Are you doing your best? Are you exploring beyond your known? And so on and so on and so on. So a bit rambly, but those are my.
No, that's great. It feels like there's definitely a theme of a tension between the exquisite and the torturous in these experiences that we're describing. Now, not to signal a performance with the word torturous, but I think I have to. Gemini, you very kindly agreed to read a small extract from what was previously Hindu times and is now
Oh yeah, deities de Dundee.
deities de Dundee.
David.
So is there any context that you want to give?
Oh yeah. So the context for the play is that the Hindu gods come to Dundee in the avatars of these typical Dundee guys. And basically, they've come down to save Earth, because when there's an imbalance in the text, in the Hindu text, if there's an imbalance between good and evil, then Vishnu will come down to counteract that. So he's actually, in the Vedanta, he's come to Earth 9 times. So for this play, this is his 10th time. And weirdly, I did actually write it just before all that COVID stuff happened. So I was like, oh my God, maybe he's going to come and help us. But also, Vishnu and Lakshmi are eternal consorts through all time and eternity. So if they're ever separated, they will come to be rejoined. And what's happened is Lakshmi has come down to Dundee, so he's also come to follow her and be reunited with her. But she's actually inhabited a human. So he's also got to get her to come out of this human being. So he inhabits human form to, cajole her and bring her back so they can all go home. And he takes his friend Brahman with him. And so they arrive in Dundee and, end up getting locked in a spar shop. Then they end up getting on it a wee bit. And but during that whole time, they never ever forget about their ultimate mission, which is to save Earth and be reunited with their everlasting love, and thereby also bring love and harmony back to Earth and remind Earth what love is truly about. But they do get sidetracked on the body. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's that kind of, for me, the best of everything that I love. I love the humour and the culture of Dundee, and how you can take this huge philosophical approach to, what suffering is, what it means to be human. And in Hinduism, they don't see it that way. They look at suffering, there is no such thing, and to be human, it's the privilege, and in the suffering is the privilege of life. And I really wanted to put that through that filter of a Dundee person, and because they would come out with their own angle and their own comedy, but also bring such truth to it. And then that made me realize that, we're all divine, and the divine is in the darkest of places, not just in the temples. And that's what really, made me want to bring these characters alive.
So this is Vishnu,
yes.
in the prologue to the play, so the very beginning.
So Vishnu comes down as Vince, and he's kind of just setting the tone for what he's about to do. And he's on his eagle, which is Garunda, and he's come down to earth on his eagle, and he's kind of speaking to himself, probably. So he says, Shri Lakshmi, aye, she's the bonniest of the goddesses, sang so lustful sky elephants, decked out in lotuses, pearls and gems. This world may have changed, but you are more than I could have ever hoped for, because we are inseparable, even in thoughts. There is nothing beyond us. Garunda, fly higher and mind those multis. I need to see her the night. I can't wait any longer. Without her, I can't even do now. Hopefully, my body's already down there, Brahman, waiting on us. I am the guardian of earth, and she is my love. Love, grace, and purity. Love is divinity of all eternity. Follow me once again on my beautiful journey of Vishnu Praya, and let's get my chick back afore my tea gets cold.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
So, as demonstrated, what is in common in this panel is three contemporary playwrights who've taken these religious figures in recent work and work of the past 10, 15 years and transposed them into very, very much a context of now. We've talked a little bit about Hindu Times or Day Dundee. We've talked a little bit about Queen Jesus. And I'd like to just briefly touch on the Strange Undoing of Prudentia Heart, which is a work by David Gregg, which I know is sometimes studied here at New College, and has also recently been on as part of the Edinburgh Fringe, kind of brought back to Scottish audiences after really being absolutely everywhere all over the world. But it's a work that focuses on a history and a lineage of Scottish border ballads. And in fact, the lead character of it is an academic who's is their thesis on a topography of hell.
What could we say?
Is that well remembered? Now, what I'm interested in here is there a in terms of the religious or the iconic figure that exists within Prudentia Heart is the devil. The devil makes a big appearance in this work. And a big impact on Prudentia, and a big impact on us as an audience as we experience the play. And I'm interested in the lineage, or what you see as a lineage that leads to your devil. Is it something rooted in a wider context of Scottish work, or a wider context of literature and religious thought generally?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure I'm entirely able to answer it. We spoke about the big rock of Calvinism that forms so much of Scottish culture until the great sort of waves of immigration in the 19th century, when Catholicism starts to influence us in a refreshed way. And I think there is a strong taste of the Calvinism in my devil, because he is in a lineage from James Hogg and the Confessions of a Justified Sinner, or the kind of Gothic stories. I'm thinking of Thrawn Janet, that Robert Louis Stevenson, I think, is Thrawn Janet. And anyway, I think there is a tradition from which he comes, but of course the point is he's not God, he's the devil, isn't he? So in a weird way, he's the interesting one in terms of the Scottish tradition, because he's not the kind of, he's the inevitable other side. He's the hypocrisy. It's brilliant that Joe talked about hypocrisy. The Scotland is full of that hypocrisy, because the two sides of the coin are the kind of face of the respectable, and then on the other side the desire and the lust and the fear and the drink and the pleasure and the joy, and then back to the other side of church on a Sunday and sniffing out your window to find out what everybody else is doing and condemn them, back and forth. So I think that's probably the root of the devil in my mind, is that that which is on the other side of the apparently respectable. And Prudentia says, or someone says it to Prudentia, it's about Edinburgh. Don't they say that about Edinburgh? Prudentia, say the women of the borders to her, that it's you're all respectable, but underneath there's a perpetual orgy. So I do think there is something in that, and I suppose the ballads and so on, and Tam O'Shanter and the witches and the supernatural, the fairies, they're all in there as well. But Prudentia falls, well, he kidnaps her, and she is with him for over 100,000 years, and he offers her the contents of his library, which is all the knowledge that has ever been, including recordings of Robert Burns playing live in pubs in Ayrshire and so on. And there is that is paradise to her, and yet also, of course, its very endlessness ultimately makes it hell. So it's just an interesting relationship between the two of them, where she very nearly redeems him, but in fact, of course, he's pulled back to hell. Just one tiny thing, sorry, that I did I did a pilgrimage to Iona earlier this year. I didn't set out intending to do a pilgrimage to Iona. I set out just to go for a walk, but I sort of didn't stop, and I kind of found that I was going to Iona, very hopeful that something might happen. And in actual fact, I had a wonderful walk and full of very interesting things, but nothing particularly religious happened. However, when I was on Iona, and I kind of thought, come on, something's going to happen here. It's going to be a massive revelation. But it wasn't really happening for me. And then I was walking down to the beach, and this priest was walking up the other way with a couple of people, dressed as a proper sort of Catholic priest, and speaking with I think maybe a Spanish accent. And I only heard what he said as he walked past me. And he said, I think hell is the reality of living with wants that cannot be fulfilled. I wrote it down somewhere. Anyway, it was something about this thing of he was saying to the people he was with that hell isn't a real place. It's the human reality of unrealized desire, or something like that. It was really brilliantly phrased. And I wanted to run after him and say, I don't know, are you sent by God to tell me these things? It's very interesting. But I was a bit shy to do that. But anyway, that's my devil. We all carry in us unrealized desires, secrets, fears, and they are often a source of joy and creativity in strange ways, but they are ultimately hellish.
Thank you. I realize we're coming up on time, and I want to allow a little bit of time for any questions that might come from the audience. But before that, we have our second extract. Joe's very kindly agreed to perform a little bit of her Queen Jesus. So Joe, I'd like to invite you to that, and then we'll open it up for questions. So please, if you've got anything kind of formulating in your mind, take this time and enjoy Joe's performance.
We never used to meet in churches. Not in the old days when I lived as a man. All those thousands of years ago. We used to meet in people's houses. And it was a queer person that always used to guide us there. They suppressed a lot when they told my story, but this is one thing they could not hide. You'll find it in Mark and in Luke. Oh, dear Mark, dear Luke. And we know the person was queer because we had to look for a man carrying a water jar. Men. Men don't carry water. It's women's work. Men are too ashamed. Isn't it strange how in this world men should be proud to carry knives and guns, proud to carry the instruments of death, but ashamed to carry the source of life. But she wasn't ashamed, the dear soul who guided us. Oh, she was beautiful. This person born male, wearing a woman's dress and with jasmine in her hair. She was one of us. And this is how it all began. A group of us meeting as friends because we want to change the world.
Thank you so much. So as I say, we've got roughly about 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so. If there's anybody in the audience who has a question, please put up your hand, and I believe that there's a mic moving around.
Thank you for that. Just for Joe Clifford, I wanted to ask, for most people, their experience of religion and theatre is limited to nativity plays. Is the nativity a subject that's ever interested you for writing?
I never saw a nativity play. Never. I mean, as soon as I started to think about what I wanted to do with plays, I wanted to give people pleasure. And I wanted to give people pleasure in the richest and most satisfying way I could. So I wanted to give people the pleasure of the intellect. I wanted my plays to be about something really important, so you could have great discussions in the bar afterwards. I wanted them to give pleasure emotionally, so that people, as they watched them, would feel things very intensely, would want to cry, would want to laugh, would get very cross, all that kind of stuff. I wanted them to have beautiful language in them. I wanted them to give a chance for actors to be amazing. I wanted them to be sexy. Beautiful men, beautiful women, beautiful trans people on stage. But I also wanted them to speak spiritually, because we are spiritual beings, it seems to me. And we're hungry, we're thirsty for that. And so all of my plays have got a supernatural being in them. I mean, the Losing Venice had a priest. Lucy's play had Mary, the Mother of God. Playing with Fire had the devil. And of course Jesus, and so on. And that really matters. And there is a bit in Queen Jesus about nativity, but it's not the normal sort of thing. Thank you.
We got any other questions? We've got a question over here.
Oh, it's really great, this microphone
I
action, isn't
know.
it?
She's going to have to.
Wow.
Somebody
Were you in
over there.
training?
Thank you very much for the talk. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are on how theater might be a strong or better medium for telling religious stories or exploring faith, and what you think that the medium of theater can kind of give to these stories that perhaps a written text couldn't give.
Does anybody want to take that?
Yeah.
Do you want to do
Theatre and drama and art and music, and it brings a dimension and it brings a perspective to religion, to these huge subject matters. So there's no sense in just reiterating what people can read, but bringing an insight and another perspective to the subject. And sometimes what is even more profound to that is a personal experience and perspective to that subject. So you're sharing someone else's experience of life through the medium of religion, for example, and what they've gone through. And I think that's the most valuable components when you're bringing huge subject matter like this to an audience through the mechanism of theatre, is what are you saying that's different? And what perspective are you bringing to the audience that's going to change culture and society itself in the future? And how are you shaping those ideologies? And ultimately, what is the benefit of writing this and sharing it with people? It must have some kind of profound message underlying that can't be found in those texts, that can only be discovered through the experience of having gone through something. And that's the power of theatre and drama.
That's a really good answer. That's brilliant.
Thank you.
But actually, the thing to do is to come and see my work.
Yes. Yes.
If you go along to St Mary's Episcopal Cathedral this coming Thursday and Friday at 7 o'clock, I think, you can come to the COVID Requiem, which is our attempt to create a memorial for people that have died of COVID. And we're performing with the amazing St Mary's Choir. They're doing the Foray Requiem. So that's one answer to you. The other answer is to come along and see Jesus, Queen of Heaven.
Where's that?
And I've forgotten what date it is, so I'm just going to look it up. It's in the chaplaincy, and it's coming up later this month. And, oh my lordy. Oh, here we are. 19th November, Saturday. 5 o'clock, I think.
Where?
Edinburgh University Chaplaincy. Come along. You'll find out.
I can definitely vouch for that as an experience. It's incredibly unique. You won't have experienced theatre like it, and you won't have experienced sitting and being with people like that. So please don't miss out on your opportunities. But I'm sure there'll be many more in the future because it's an ongoing journey. I think for Joe.
Yeah, hopefully this will be the start of a good whole range of performances.
Yes.
No, I think
I want to take it to Dundee.
I think we have time for
Dundee.
one more question over there.
Amazing.
I just wanted to ask, in response to those last two answers, whether you, as playwrights, see yourselves in a sort of messianic role.
That's funny.
Somebody said... Oh,
David.
David, come on, David, off you go.
You seem quite messianic right now.
I
He
know,
does, you look very good.
Exactly.
No.
I don't believe you.
But look, I do think we occupy a shamanic role, or a role that you could compare to things that are similarly like the aerials that get the I'm going to say message, but actually it's not about message. It's the aerials that take in the stuff of the world and then sort of bring it out in form. So I do think there is a this thing of being a communicating point between two worlds. I do think is something that theatre absolutely does. And just quickly to reply to the previous question, I think the mistake that religion often makes with theatre is thinking that you can do sort of propaganda, which you just can't. It's also awful, and so you can't do it for anything, you can't do it really for politics, but certainly the big mistake with religious theatre is it tends to try and, it tends to not understand that the point about theatre is to explore what you don't know, which is a wonderful way of exploring religion, but it only works if you let go of your fundamentals, I guess, So anyway, but that's a yada yada. I would say no, shamanic, not messianic.
Well, I think on that bombshell, the playwrights aren't messiahs. We will conclude. So could I please have a big round of applause for Joe and David and Jamin. Thank you so much. And I was told at the beginning, I'm going to be a good host here. I was told to instruct everybody to exit in that direction. Julian, am I right in saying this? And that is where the bookshop is, which is handily placed if you're feeling so inclined. But thank you again, and enjoy if you're sticking around for the last event.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Just to say, do stay. Come back for 6 o'clock, where you'll have the chance to hear leading Scottish author James Robertson in conversation with Flora. Name has just jumped out of my head, so someone will help me here. Can we go to the next slide, if someone could? Thank you very much. Flora Johnston. So do come for that, 6 o'clock. But thank you again. Wonderful session, inspiring, fantastic to hear you. Thank you very much for beautiful sharing and insights from each of you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.